extremely active on Twitter,
Yeah.
talking about not only countering bad advice and bad science, but also speaking out and calling out people like Baba Ramdev and Patanjali when it comes to the Corona kit, and now called the Coronil kit. You've also been talking about Bharat Biotech and the kind of things that they've been putting out, along with, of course, our rather ridiculous timeline of 15th of August that ICMR seems to have just pulled out of their hat. Um, so just, unwrap that story for me, please, and for the listeners.
Yes, I am doing a lot of work in countering misinformation in science and medicine, and I've been doing
Especially
it
with
for
altnews.in, right?
Altnews Science. So my platform
Altnews
is not
Science.
Altnews.
Okay.
It is a section on the website. The science section is quite prominent. We've put it like right on the top. I am the founding editor of the platform because I believe in evidence-based science, and the amount of money that they were investing in the Ayush ministry, which is like the parallel of the health ministry. No country in the world has two health ministries, one for pseudoscience, the other one's for real
We're
health,
just special that
actual
way.
health ministry. We're very special. And the biggest increase in the budget after the military is actually of Ayush ministry. It's not so much, but the percentage of increase every year is of the Ayush ministry. And they're constructing the in Delhi, the like Ayush hospital right next to AIIMS. Our entire tourism, medical tourism in South Asia is very much focused on coming to India. I mean, when I was in Sydney, I've heard so many Afghans, a lot of Pakistanis, they wanted to come to India because it was cheaper, better care, and
Yeah.
reliable care and better technology. I mean, people who couldn't go to the US and all these other places. I mean, of course, we were in Sydney, but they had relatives back in Kabul and here and there, and they would say we would want to send our relatives to Delhi instead of sending them somewhere else because that was the right thing to do. We are better in that region. We ace medical tourism, but when you're trying to replace that with voodoo, we're going to go nowhere. The entire country will go through that system first because it's cheaper, and a couple of years later, a couple of months later, when the problems that they went to the clinician in the first instance have become chronic, and not every problem will become chronic. A lot of the infections, a lot of the diseases are self-resolving as well. But when that problem becomes chronic, cancer, diabetes, blood pressure, and we have them by the dozen, that when that becomes chronic, it's going to go into the real medical system. That's when it's going to be a challenge. So something that could have been easily avoided a couple of years ago, you've sent it over there and then you made it worse, and then they do a U-turn. Or in worst cases, they don't survive, or they have a really bad quality of life. Do we want that? I've looked at a lot of the drugs that they pushed out. It's it's not even on clinical. I mean, clinical trials are like far off. They haven't even seen efficacy in animal work, in animal research, and they've already manufactured and pushed them out. Baba Ramdev sells this cataract drops for eyes, and I haven't written about it yet, but I've done the research. And on his website, he proudly pushes out this paper that, oh, look, there's a study, because people think that, oh, who's going to read the paper? As long as the paper's there, it is effective, right? And he goes and says, this is this bottle of drops, and it has ginger and lemon and onion and all sorts of things, and it makes you teary and everything. And people think, oh, it's working because it's I can feel it.
Works because it burns.
It works because it burns, but importantly, it doesn't work just for an illness. So if you have cataract, macular degeneration, it will fix every single eye disease. Not only that, the claim is that it will protect you from becoming ill. Like it will protect you from an eye disease and cure every single. Now we know that every disease has a different like origin, and you have to treat the real problem. But just by pouring some onion, this and that. Okay, now made their claims, all of that. I say, let's dig out the paper. Let's have a look at what happened. They tested this thing on 9 rabbits. They induced what they induced. I can't remember. I think it was macular degeneration or something. And then they put these droplets in them.
Hmm.
regardless of the result, and I don't think they did a very good job at it, but regardless of the result, I don't want to put something in my eye when it's gone only in 9 rabbits. And then they publish them in shoddy journals,
It's
something
the
that has,
shortcut for any ultimate person. See,
yeah,
this is evidence-based. There's a study. Just because there's a
there's a
study, that
study.
doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it's already proven.
And a lot of the journalists who report these things, even a lot of alt-right people, they just read the conclusion or the
That's right.
introduction. And someone
Mm.
like me who will go through the study and look at the data and then find out, oh, the data is just, I mean, I can't even say it's terrible. I can't even say it's an honest mistake.
Like I've
It's
seen one of the things that one of the ingredients in this coronal kit, which they've been selling, because initially I started researching it when they said that we have a study in progress, which I don't think they've ever come out with a study, have they?
okay. So I wrote this about the cornell kit in my article, and I talked about it on the Mirror Now show as well.
Hmm.
The clinical trial, which he kept quoting, he didn't say randomized control trial. It is actually called RCT, randomized
Yeah.
control trial. He kept saying clinically controlled trial, so he probably doesn't know. Sure, he doesn't know the terminology. Benefit of doubt, sure. The
Hmm.
people who did the research, some guy called Ganpat Devpura did the research, and
Hmm.
Acharya, whatever his name is, the guy in the white clothes,
Yeah, yeah, I
orange,
know.
white. I remember those two.
Yeah.
So the guy in white clothes, he's generally the main author on a lot of these papers, the senior author, and then there's the first author. I looked at those authors, the first and the second authors. None of them had an experience in clinical trials before. None of them had published before. They were actually quite senior, so it's not like a junior scientist who'd done research. So they didn't understand what they were doing. They designed the study and they applied for clinical trial ethics clearance, and they said, look, we're going to submit the documents in the evening. You'll have all these documents, which is basically the approval of it. That approval was just to conduct the study, and it's had this basic information about how many people they're going to have in the study, what they're going to do, etc., etc.
Hmm.
And then the ethics department came back and said that they didn't apply for ethics for coronavirus treatment. When they applied the ethics, they said it was some sort of a treatment for the upper respiratory system. They didn't say it was like sardi zukam type treatment.
Ah,
It wasn't like actually for corona. So that was that. And I give this benefit of doubt to Ramdev, even though he's published so many things, that he doesn't understand the difference between paper, a research study, published research study, and an ethics approval.
yeah.
But the guys who are the first authors, they know that. That Acharya guy, who is the owner of all
Balkrishna.
of this, Balakrishna, that's right, the white guy. I mean, not the literal white guy, the guy in the
Yeah,
white clothes.
yeah, yeah.
He knows, he's published, he's on so many studies. There are more than 147 or 67 odd studies on
Wow.
Patanjali website on yoga and all sorts of things. So they know this, but they still send the documents that was only ethical approval. And then different hospital that which approved that, okay, yeah, we're okay to do this in our hospital, fine. And then they didn't attach the papers. They wrote in 3 lines that these are the preclinical studies on the
Hmm.
basis of which we did this research. So there were 3 bottles in the coronal kit. One of the bottles was Swasari Ras.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that study was done in mice.
With
Uh,
an induced allergic reaction, which
yes,
got them
induced
to
asthmatic
asthmatic
allergic.
allergic reaction.
So that was induced in the lab. It wasn't
Mm.
actually on COVID or any infectious disease. We know infection and inflammatory induced inflammation is completely different. You can have
Mm.
inflammation due to infection, but you can have inflammation like an allergy as well. You don't need an infection for that. Anyway, that was in mice, not in humans. So human research has never been even published yet.
Yeah.
Second bottle was the actual coronal tablet bottle. Now that has
Uh-huh.
3 different herbs. One is giloy, which is licorice root. You know the licorice. It's not
Yeah, yeah.
candy. It's like this bitter kind of thing, which is really popular though. Licorice,
Hmm.
tulsi, and ashwagandha. I don't know the English name for ashwagandha. It's some
It's a
scientific name that I don't know.
yeah, it's a
And then
complicated one.
tulsi is holy basil, I think.
Yeah,
I think so.
holy
It's
basil.
basil, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
holy basil. So, so for licorice only, they had done a research study, not for ashwagandha, not for tulsi, only for licorice, and the study was actually in a software, in a computer, like a simulated model in a computer software
Mhm.
that kind of was showing the interaction between protein A and protein B that was supposedly involved in the coronavirus. Now, that's not even done in vivo in any live animal, not even in a cell. So that's just for Giloy, or which is touted like endlessly. And then they came up saying that it's an immunity booster. But guess what? Majority of the people dying due to the coronavirus are because their immunity is actually increasing and shooting up to that level where their renin-angiotensin system is being activated, the vasodilation is happening, and that's because the immunity is shooting to that point that you're not supposed to. So you're not supposed to increase the immunity to that point. That's why dexamethasone, which is a steroid, that's working, because it suppresses your immunity at the right time. So you give
Mhm.
dexamethasone not in advance, but at that time when you have something called the cytokine storm, which is like this huge immunity reaction. You don't want to increase the immunity of somebody who is at that point because you're going to kill someone. It doesn't,
Yeah,
which is a good thing. It doesn't increase the immunity, but it doesn't do anything to the COVID infection. So whether they
yeah.
sell it as an immunity drug or anything else, it's not going to do anything.
Mm.
But the problem here is that people might think that they are clear of the infection, and people might think that this has helped them, and then they might go and infect other people just thinking that they're
Absolutely.
fine now. And the third thing that I wanted to say is that when they said that they tested in humans, which I have no idea, I haven't seen the data yet, they haven't published, they are saying that they were coronal positive. They didn't actually test that they were coronal positive before. They gave them the drug and then they tested that they were coronal negative. But the guys that they tested on were only 50 people, by the way. Generally, for a drug or a vaccine, you need thousands and thousands of people. These are only
Mm.
50 people and 50 controls. But those 50 people, they were just in contact with somebody who had, in like an isolation, who had coronavirus. So they were those people who were in contact and isolated, but they were never tested corona positive. So they just assumed that because they were in contact, and then they gave coronal, and then 5 days later, this is what they're saying. Again, I don't know. They haven't
They just
published.
said
5 days
this.
later, yeah, they said all this. 5 days later, they get the test and it's negative, and they're like, oh look, we turned them negative.
God, this is so
I mean,
slimy. Like it's such a con job.
it's not just a contract. Imagine someone like me who is looking at such cool research and trying to do all these different things. I am underused in Altnews Science. I am here because I'm frustrated with the amount of, I would say, lack of intelligence and lack of critical thinking, not just for medicine, but for in general for a lot of things.
Mhm.
But maybe this is where I can make any impact, or I would start somewhere. I mean, Pratik obviously does a lot of Zubair and Sam as well, who are the founders of Alt News Portal. They
Mhm.
actually do a lot more. They talk about politics and stuff. I can't do that, and this is
Yeah.
what I can do. So I'm going to do this and do my small bit to get the rationality, critical thinking, in
It's
people.
very important. And I've
Yeah.
uh, I've I wrote about the Corona kit, whatever it is, recently. And since they didn't bring out a study, and I didn't think they would. It doesn't look like they will. I thought I'd do my own research. And I'm a layperson. I don't have medical training. I'm not saying that everybody can read a paper, but
No, they can't.
I've taken considerable time. I've read a book called How to Read a medical paper. Like how to read a paper. It's a scientific paper. So I can't say that you'll learn everything from that either. But there are
No.
certain things that I've managed to pick up, which is figuring out what is your target population, what is it that you're testing on, how many subjects are there, is it randomized, is it placebo controlled, is it
Exactly.
blinded, is it double blinded, is it triple blinded, and in just that methodology, a lot of the flaws of a study can come out. But I did find that there were, especially, I looked up ashwagandha, and surprisingly enough, they had done the only thing I could find reliably in this context. I mean, there's been a lot of other studies when it comes to testosterone and muscle mass and stress and a lot of other things that ashwagandha is being tested for. I don't know what their status is, but specifically for towards COVID-19, it tested for figuring out if the binding domain of the virus and how it can connect to
The
the
receptor.
the ACE2 receptor.
Hmm? So the
And
spike protein. Yeah.
so this was only, again, a computer model
Yeah. So it's the same thing
on
with the Gil.
on
Yeah, it's a software.
yes, on basically on whether the medicine can connect with the virus's binding receptors and make them less susceptible to connect to ACE2 receptors. This is just a computer model. It's not done in
Exactly.
any in any living animals.
Yeah.
It's not been done in the lab in a petri dish. It's not been done in humans. There's no way to know how that will turn out in real life. And even me, with my limited resources and understanding of scientific papers, because see, when it comes to more complicated scientific papers, I do have real scientists I can refer to, and I say, this is the paper I'm checking out, what do you
Mm,
think of it? And I can get, proper feedback and an interpretation on it, unless it's already been written by a reliable resource.
mm.
And even me, like, just looking through that paper in like 10 minutes, I was like, this is not even a real study. This is just a computer model. Same thing with Giloy and Tulsi. I couldn't find anything on the
Yeah, I did
Swasar.
not look for these studies that you're talking about because they were not mentioned in that ethics application. I wanted to say that
Ah,
the documents that they have submitted doesn't include any research on this.
I did more research than they did. Oh my god.
And you are still the creme de la creme of the population who can still understand some basics of research. And but I think that's why I've created this platform. If you read my article, I think people who have a basic understanding can
Mhm.
still read and understand because I write in the most simplistic, no fancy words, just detail, going blah, 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 blah. It has to be explained to such, I mean, I go down to such simplified. Sometimes I feel like I lose a lot of detail.
Oh, it's
But
very
in
important
this,
though. It's very important.
I know, but I don't want to lose the people because if the
Mm.
people who can understand the detail, they won't be here. They don't need
Mm.
to look at this, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't convince them. And sometimes I simplify it to that point, but it's still a lot of detail.
Hmm.
But you should really check those papers out to those articles out on Altnews Science, and you'll know the problems with the research. But what you did is work, a lot of work, and most people are not prepared to do that. They'll just look at the headline of my article and then they'll be like, okay, agree or disagree whether I like this person or not, whether I like this platform or not, etc.,
Mm.
etc. And then some people like, okay, I like this person because on and off she's been mostly talking about science, so maybe she's a real scientist. See, I don't have a problem with Ayurveda. My problem is do the right kind of trials, do whatever you need to
Exactly.
do, and then it doesn't remain Ayurveda. That becomes mainstream medicine because you've
Exactly.
extracted the active compound from something and then you've tested it effectively. But the reason, so they put a ban on regular scientists commenting on or peer reviewing Ayush stuff because they don't understand. Our bodies are not different, right? Your body, my physiology, your physiology, exactly the same. How does
Mm.
Ayush treat it differently and real medicine treats it differently? It doesn't. It's the same mechanism. But they're afraid that we'll be too critical and then they'll be like, oh, you don't understand. No, I've been reading these papers for more than 10 years. I do understand a lot. I have read more papers than Ayush people have. I
Hmm.
mean, I have taken reviews of the head of the Central Council of Research of Homeopathy India and found faults in their papers and is head of a council, Homeopathy Council, and they're quoting each other and they're all reviews. And they haven't even read the entire reviews before quoting each other. And they're saying the evidence is in that study, and that is a review. And the other guy saying the evidence in the other study, and that is a review as well. And then they come back.
Well, to be fair, if they really were thorough about science, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, we wouldn't be
I
having
mean,
this
this wouldn't have
conversation.
been a
But
problem in the first place.
yeah, but the thing is that and don't get me wrong, there's good research in India. Some of them go through really good journals as well. It's just that there's a
Hmm.
huge disconnect. Those people don't comment because it's too like even I think that way sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. It's beneath me to do this. But how important it is to do this,
Yeah.
regardless of that. And the entire reason there's this huge difference between the so-called scientists, armchair intellectuals, and I'm saying armchair because they don't really communicate. They think it's really beneath them to go down to a layperson,
Mm.
and they think it's not their job to do it. Like it's a government's job to get them, but it's not happening. Somebody has to take an initiative, and nobody's
Absolutely. And the
saying
more
anything.
voices, the better. We need a lot more of that out there because it is. And see, I honestly believe that most of the people who believe in alt medicine, okay, not most of them, but definitely a lot of them, just haven't been informed of the opposing argument. They haven't been put
Exactly.
out of their bubble because we are so insulated in our families, in our communities, where homeopathy and Ayurveda and all the other, and even acupuncture and acupressure.
Siddha.
I was
Oh yeah.
coughing the other night because I don't know, I had choked on something and managed to shoot chili sauce up my nose. But I was coughing profusely, and my mother told me to hold my thumb,
How
which
did that go?
is which is an acupressure thing that we saw in
Yeah.
some email or some relative had told us like ages ago, and we just take it for granted. But the thing is that coughing usually goes away by itself,
Yeah.
especially if you just choked on some food and you're coughing it out, and it'll be fine. Like whether you press your thumb or not, it's going to be okay in
Yeah.
a few seconds.
Yeah.
But it's these things which we've just imbibed as a natural part of our belief system, and it hasn't been
Yeah.
challenged. I
Yeah.
have hopefully talked my parents out of going for homeopathy, even though they have been hardcore believers most of their
But
lives.
homeopathy is not Indian, it's German, right?
Exactly.
It came in Germany like 300 years ago. But I mean, a lot of the political leaders, including the prime minister of your country, is kind of promoting it so heavily. That's why
Yeah.
people have made it a part of their national interest. But Ayurveda is linked to it is linked to our culture. How can you remove that linked to the religion and the culture? And then same way, Unani is also linked to the Islamic roots, and
Hmm.
there are so many discrepancies in how it's not. It's actually never written in Quran. It's in this one hadith that was just random at that point in time. I am not even sure if the hadith has been verified properly or not. But anyway, I don't want to get into the religious discussion of it. But at the end of the day, if you still go by the religion, which I don't suggest, I suggest you do the right thing and move on with science when it comes about health, no matter what is
Absolutely.
written 1400 years ago. There is another hadith to challenge that and counter it, and which will say that the Prophet has asked you to move on with the
Hmm.
progressing times, and whatever is the best treatment of that time, you should use it. And this is clearly not. So there is conflicting stuff even there.
Yeah.
But things about Unani is that it actually didn't originate. And I have written an article on Unani as well because people will be like, you keep talking about Ayurveda. There's no Unani. I have written a thing about Unani, and then I did a lot of research, found out that Unani comes from Yunnan, and Yunnan was actually in Greece. So it came from ancient Greece.
Wow.
And then it went to Persia. When the Persian Empire spread to India, they took it with
Hmm.
us and then gave us all these fine things like ruafza and all of that. And it was supposed to do
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of stuff. We just have it happily in Ramadan and say, it's a nice drink, whatever. But it was supposed to cure a lot of things because it's
Hmm.
got all these herbs and stuff. But then it went from Persia to India and China. And then India and China, it's a mixture of Indian Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, ancient Greek, and ancient Persia. Now, Unani is not practiced in Greeks or I mean, not even in Saudi Arabia. Unani is only in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not religion. I mean, I think there's only one kata that came out that said that this is Unani, and a lot of people fell for it. So I'm kind of glad
Mm.
that people didn't buy that. But this coronal everybody bought it as Ayurveda. And guess what? It's not Ayurveda either. Ayurveda didn't know about these things, and a lot of scriptures
Yeah.
are coming that oh, we knew about this thing in Charak Samhita. It is written. Charak Samhita is the Ayurvedic book.
Hmm.
It was written back then. No, it didn't. You can't have an answer to every single problem. That's religious
Yeah.
dogma. That's not science. And
Exactly.
probably the Ayurveds, uh, if they were alive right now, they would be laughing at us
Yeah. I'm sure.
because they were progressive of their times. You know,
Exactly.
they found out that oh, if our blood is sweet and if the ants are attracted to our blood, there must be sugar in our blood, and that's probably diabetes. And there's sugar in our urine. But
Yeah, that
guess
was
what?
science back then. That was
Yeah,
science.
exactly, and it was
You
very
know.
progressive science. But
Yeah.
that has to move with the time.
Exactly. And
It's
you could even
it's not
say that
different.
modern medicine is even in some parts a form of Ayurveda. It kind of started from a similar place. And at the same time, right now, when we have quinine, which has come from the bark of a tree,
Yeah,
which Trump is touting as a COVID cure, which it isn't, but it's a
and
great medicine. It's hydroxychloroquine, has been around for ages, and it's derived from that, from
it's
quinine.
great for malaria,
It's
not
great for
for
malaria,
COVID.
exactly.
Yeah, the
Exactly.
problem. And we're not saying that the rest of the world, real science, is devoid of a problem. I mean, that study that happened in the south of France on hydroxychloroquine was not
Hmm.
randomized. He picked people from one hospital, and the other people who were the control ones, he picked them from a different hospital.
Hmm.
And he made the data look like these guys were getting cured of hydroxychloroquine, but most people get cured of COVID anyway. So
Exactly.
there are so many faults with it, and it's not evidence based as well. That is quackery. If you think COVID is going to get cured by hydroxychloroquine, it is still pseudoscience. And this is also pseudoscience.
Absolutely.
It's not Ayurveda. But people are defending it in the name of Ayurveda because a saffron clad man is selling it. It's close to the government, and now they've done a full U-turn. They've all accepted that he's done good work for the country.
I knew he'd slip through that loophole.
Yeah,
I even mentioned it in my article. I was like, this guy is so slimy. He's so greased up with snake oil that he's just going to slide right through
yeah. It's a
whatever
business,
loopholes
right?
are.
It's a business,
Absolutely.
and
And
the
that's,
same with Sadhguru. He's exactly like that. It's a business for
yeah,
him as well. I mean, I've seen his website. He's been anti-vaxxer. He advocates for mercury in the drugs and knowing it's poisonous.
doesn't
He's
he
selling
know that
dengue
Ayurveda's
treatments.
got heavy metals in their drugs?
Exactly, lead and mercury being found. There's a study, there was a randomized study on different drugs imported from India, and about 30% of them had heavy metals, including lead and mercury and all these other things. He's also a businessman. I mean, he sells lots of things. On his website, on Sadhguru's website, I've seen, I think it was like 100,000 or 200,000 rupees. So 100,000 is a lakh, right? In India. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it was somewhere in that figure. He was selling his own footprint on silver that was that expensive. So, I mean, those things happen, and they're it's business too, right? It's
Absolutely.
it's
And
not
that's
like they're
exactly,
doing it out of their own, sainthood.
yeah.
Uh,
No,
um,
that's exactly what we are trying to do, right? Which is why the work that we do and other skeptics and rationalists, so to speak, are doing in this country and around the world is to just try and be a voice of science, be a voice of reason out there so that people at least have some sort of a conflicting idea that they may encounter. So that's why I think
yeah.
like a lot of people out there who believe in it are
Mm,
open to conflicting evidence. I mean, they will go
yeah.
to a doctor if they have cancer or, heart trouble or,
Yes.
anything else for any
Absolutely.
other chronic ailment or severe ailment, but they'll still go to the homeopath for other things
For
and go to the,
self-resolving issues, because they make them feel better. Because I think the biggest difference between them is that homeopaths and Ayurvedics spend a lot of time, they have a lot of empathy, and they really
yeah,
talk through every
that
little
is
trouble.
very important.
And the other guys, they think, oh, I don't need to entertain them, or my viewpoint is this is a body that I need to treat, blah blah. I know the
Hmm.
mechanistic side, and they just completely detach from the human side of medicine. I think that
Which I
there's a
think is
problem
also
with.
a big problem. We
It's a
need to,
problem. Yeah. Yeah,
that is something
absolutely.
that a lot of doctors need to address. Fortunately, I've had good doctors on the whole. I've encountered some bad ones,
Yeah.
but the best ones are the ones who sit down with you and they explain to you what you're going through and they explain to you
Yeah.
what your treatment modality is going to be like. But a lot of them just want to kind of get in as many people as
Yeah.
possible so you can
But
treat as
that's a
many people, get
business.
their bills paid, all
Yeah.
set, all done.
But that's because of the business model, right? This is not a
Exactly.
business. It should never be a business. It's an essential service that should be state given on the basis of people's taxes. I know the argument is like India doesn't pay taxes and blah blah, but
Mm,
that's what it should be. It's not
absolutely. And
that, you know,
it's
they're not there to make money.
exactly. So I feel that this, like what you're doing with Altnews Science, is essential, and especially it's a platform that's getting a lot of visibility. It's an important thing to have that information out there for people to find and for people to encounter.
Yeah,
But when it comes to people like Baba Ramdev, who know that they're scamming people, who are purposely manipulating so-called science to show that some semblance that they have some sort of evidence, because they've been throwing around words like evidence based through all of their press releases that they've been doing
and they
recently.
make it, yeah, and they make it like Eastern science versus Western science. We don't need validation in Western journals, and these Western educated scientists do this and that. Yes, I'm Western educated. I am really glad that I have a gold standard of what research process
Hmm.
should be like, and people
Absolutely.
should adhere to it. That this being tested and developed for a reason, and if you feel that you don't need this process, why are you even going through a clinical trial? Just then be open about it. You
Yeah.
adopting that process, and then you're saying, "Oh, we don't." It's about, and they make it about one versus the other, Eastern versus. There is no East versus West. You know, it's
Yes.
about
Science is
real
science.
science versus pseudoscience. If it's in the East,
Exactly.
it's still science. If it's real science. So what are you saying that
Absolutely.
all these IITs and Indian Institute of Sciences, they're not producing science because it's in the East. They're producing science and good science.
Absolutely. No, actually, I think that's a good place to end it today. I mean, we could go on for hours, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but and we will probably the next time we get you on. But for now, thank you so much. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. You
Thank
have blown
you.
my mind
Likewise.
several times over the last couple of hours. Thank you so much for the work you do to understand and counter extreme violence and extremism in one context,
Yeah.
and on the other hand, fighting pseudoscience and fighting for reason and science
I think I'm
for
fighting for
India and around the world. Sorry?
yeah, I think I'm fighting for reason and science. It's not about pseudoscience or violence. I think the main goal of all of this is to look at life through an evidence-based perspective. I mean, I want people
Absolutely.
to look at terrorism and violence through evidence-based perspective and not
Mm.
through the biases of anti this or that. Don't fall for babas, whether it's a
Yeah,
red or an orange or a green or a whatever, or a white. I don't know. But
absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
yeah,
But
yeah.
thank you very much for joining us. We will definitely have you back. There's a lot more that we need to talk about,
Thank you. I
but
am a
thank you for
very
your time.
talkative person. Thank you so much. Good night. I am endlessly. I'm talkative, and I really knew it before we even started. It's not going to be a half an hour conversation. So I am
It
sorry
is.
I kept you
I've had a
waiting.
wonderful time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great speaking to you. The pleasure's mine. And good night and goodbye.
Good night. Bye. Thank you.